Hello, it's Z. The Path of Exile Echoes of the Atlas expansion is launching soon, and I'm going to be playing in the new Ritual League. I just wanted to put out a video real quick about the build I plan on starting the league with, which is a Divine Ire Elementalist doing Ignite. I think the first thing to take a look at is the new Elementalist nodes up here. We're going to be focusing on taking golems for buffs, so we're taking both of the golem nodes. The big thing that made me really want to do this is the new node, or the new line that says summon golems are resummoned after 4 seconds, which means that we no longer have to worry about our golems dying and then having to find a good spot to resummon a bunch of golems, or worry about oh man, all 6 of our golems died, now we have to take a minute and just resummon our golems and hope we don't die. Um, the big thing that made me want to do Divine Ire is this node, Shaper of Flames. Your hits always ignite, means that no matter what damage type or multiple damage types your hit is, it will add all of them up and deal an ignite based on that damage as if it were fire damage. And then if the highest damage type of those combined damage types was fire, we just get a 25% more multiplier for free. The final node, I'm either going to be taking Mastermind of Discord, which is obviously a much more offensive option, or I'm going to be taking Bastion of Elements. Bastion of Elements would give us a really strong elemental shield and make us no longer have to worry about reflected elemental damage. Currently on the level 90 tree, we're taking 28 notables, which means we would get a 2800 HP elemental shield, which is really, really big and would be like a tremendous defensive layer. I think I will probably start Mastermind of Discord and maybe at some point later switch my Uber Lab points to Bastion of Elements as I start going up against harder and harder content. On the tree itself, we're taking both Firewalker and Lightning Walker because the bulk of our damage is going to be either fire or lightning based. Lightning Walker will scale the built-in 50% physical converted to lightning that Divine Ire has, and Firewalker will enhance all of the converted fire damage that we're doing, as well as increasing the actual damage the Ignite deals. Lightning Walker also gives us a little bit of cast speed, which is really, really important quality of life on a Divine Ire build. We're taking Elemental Overload because crits don't really matter too much on a damage over time build, so we're not building crit, so this just gives us 40% more damage in exchange for us not having to worry about crits. Up here, we're taking Breath of Flames, which is kind of a no-brainer choice for any fire damage over time build. It just is a tremendous amount of damage. We're also taking this golem cluster here that both buffs the golems that we have. In terms of what we really care about is their the buffs that they provide. Our golems are actually not going to be dealing basically any damage at all, and this also gives us +1 maximum golems, which is very, very nice. I'll talk about the jewels in just a bit, but for now, over here we're taking Holy Fire and both of the nodes leading to it, just because they're both really strong. This is just more damage. We're obviously taking any life that we're pathing near, including down here. We're just pathing into here because Holy Dominion is really good. This is one of the earlier nodes we're actually going to take just because 12 elemental resist is really nice to have while leveling. Over here, we're grabbing Divine Judgment, which is just a bunch of damage, and then both Divine Fury and Divine Wrath. Divine Fury is going to give us 5% of our Divine Ire's damage converted physical to fire damage, and just some like extra percent increased damage. We actually don't benefit from fire spells have 25% of physical damage converted to fire damage because Divine Ire does not have the fire tag on its own. It is a physical and lightning spell. But Divine Wrath gives us all of those bonuses anyways. And because we don't really care what element we're dealing, as long as we're dealing it, because the new Elementalist node makes all of our damage ignite, we're just taking this extra converted physical to lightning just for the extra damage. Down here, we're grabbing both of these nodes, which are physical damage converted to fire, which is these two nodes are the bulk of how we are making our fire damage stronger than our lightning damage in terms of when we hit, so that our fire damage gets us the 25% more multiplier for the ignite. Then Arsonist is just really good damage over time. We're taking Unwavering Stance because we're not going to have really any chance to evade enemy attacks anyways. And so for 2 points, not being able to be stunned out of our Divine Ire channel is just going to be tremendously useful. And then we're taking the Scion Life cluster down here, along with this node, which gives us a little bit of extra physical damage, but it's only 1 point off, so I figured that it was probably a good take. That's basically it for the tree. The first jewel I'll go over is the cluster jewel, which is just a large that gives fire damage. We're taking Burning Bright, Cremator, and Doriani's Lesson. Doriani's Lesson gets us a little bit of damage leached his life. It's not too important. Honestly, there's not a whole lot of really good stuff on large fire clusters. This is going to help our survivability a lot against things like porcupines by destroying their corpses so that they don't explode. And Burning Bright is actually just a really good node in general because it just gives more fire damage over time and fire damage. Both Wasting Affliction and Blowback, which are the two nodes that we're taking on both of these clusters, the mediums, increase the speed at which the fire damage is dealt. Basically making all, like, so the total damage here, where it says total damage per ignite, this is going to get condensed down into a smaller amount of time to deal that total amount of damage. So for example, if we don't have these, so what I'm trying to say is that the total damage per ignite is going to stay the same, but the speed at which that damage is dealt increases. So the damage over time effectively is boosted. In terms of our items on this POB, I don't think anything other than the Malachite's Artifice and our weapon and our shield are actually giving us any stats other than just like some life and stuff. Malachite's Artifice, we're putting a lightning golem into it. So what this is going to do is the lightning golem is going to have elemental equilibrium. But the rest of our skills won't. So the lightning golem, if it hits an enemy, is going to give it extra lightning resistance, but less resistance to fire, which basically means that our ignite is going to be applying damage to that minus 50'd fire resist stat on the enemy. And we don't have to worry about juggling different elements ourselves because only the lightning golem is going to have this. Both our scepter and our shield are just kind of really basic, just some easy damage increases. I think these are definitely doable within the first couple of days of the league. Obviously, with Harvest coming back, we're going to be able to craft much, much more powerful stuff than these. But as a league starter, this is sort of the type of stuff I'm going to be aiming for to get within the first couple of days, maybe the first week. Our jewels are a little bit more complex. We're using a Mantra of Flames to get some extra flat fire damage to our spells. We're actually getting quite a bit out of Mantra of Flames. Normally it's not that great. But because we have so many different types of golems that are giving us buffs, each one of the golem buffs counts for Mantra of Flames, and so it stacks up pretty decently high. Um, we're using the Anima Stone as a golem answer. It's kind of a no-brainer because it just gives us 2 more golems as long as we're using other primordial jewels. And for this build, we're opting to use 3 primordial eminence because we don't really care about any of the other benefits from the other primordial jewels. But eminence gives us increased effect of the buffs, which is really, really good because we're getting a lot of benefit out of all of the different buffs that our golems are giving us. For example, this stone golem here is giving us 588 life regen, just flat life regen. Because right here you see a level 20 stone golem gives 105, but we have so much increased golem buff effect between our ascendancy, the cluster on the tree, and the primordial jewels that we're getting quite a bit more. Our Chaos Golem is giving us 22% physical damage reduction, which is a huge defensive layer. Our Ice Golem is just kind of here to give us a little bit more damage. It's nice to have a bit more critical strike chance to make sure that we have 100% uptime on Elemental Overload. It's not too necessary. If you aren't able to get your hands on an Anima Stone, and you'll have to drop a golem, I would drop the Ice Golem first. Flame Golem just gives us more damage. Very nice. Lightning Golem both triggers Malachi's Artifice to do Elemental Equilibrium, and it gives us a lot of cast speed, which is really, really important on Divine Ire, because we want to be casting Divine Ire for as little as possible, and then just hitting the enemy with our fully charged laser beam, and then watching them burn for the next few seconds while we either reposition or get ready to fire off another one. I think this build is going to be really good for clearing the 10 boss Maven challenge. We don't know too much about it, but I feel like a very large area of effect that we get with this means that we'll be able to just kind of fire our laser through the crowd of enemies and then sort of move to a safe position to where we start charging up the next one. And because there are going to be so many unique enemies, Divine Ire actually gains stages every time the little tendrils around it hit a rare or unique enemy. And so where this says 7 casts per second, which is about 7 stages, that's actually going to be way, way less in any situation where there's enemies around, especially against uniques. But for the actual Divine Ire links, we're just kind of scaling our burning damage. The only really 2 interesting things to talk about here are Unbound Ailments and Infused Channeling. You could use a Swift Affliction here, but we're already not having a huge ignite duration due to how much faster the burn is applying. So I opted to go for Unbound Ailments so that we have a little bit more time to reposition and we don't have to be constantly channeling and firing the Divine Ire over and over. Infused Channeling is really good because Divine Ire has the physical and lightning tags on it, meaning that as long as we have infusion, we're going to be taking 8% less damage of both of those types. Especially physical damage reduction is kind of hard to come by, especially on a caster. So it's nice to have this. And then right here we have an Arcanist brand that is going to alternate between casting Wave of Conviction and Flammability. Both of these are just going to serve to increase the amount of damage the enemy takes by reducing their fire resistance. Flammability obviously is just minus 44 fire resistance. Wave of Conviction um, applies elemental exposure to the enemy, and Combustion combined with Wave of Conviction, which Wave of Conviction will always be igniting and activating Combustion because all of our damage always ignites. So Combustion will also be lowering their resistances even further. And Mastermind of Discord here. So exposures we inflict are just 25% more defense stripping than they would be otherwise because of our ascendancy. So Wave of Conviction combined with Flammability, Combustion, and the bonuses from Mastermind of Discord means that our enemies are going to have a tremendously low amount of elemental resistance, which is very good, especially on bosses, which is primarily where we're going to be using this Arcanist brand. We can use it while clearing, but unless we're doing something particularly difficult, just doing normal mapping, we probably won't even need to. For our aura reserves, we're going to be using Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, and Malevolence. Herald of Purity just gives us 12% more physical damage, which then gets converted into Fire and Lightning. Herald of Ash gets us 15% of our physical damage as extra fire damage, which is also very, very good. And so these two combined are actually stronger than just the 20% more damage over time that Malevolence gives us. So if you don't yet have an Enlighten, the two options that I would suggest are just to cut Malevolence. If you're leveling, honestly, I would use Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, and then Purity of Elements to cap your resists easier, just to get through the acts faster and stuff. But you can also, without the Enlighten, see we're at 0% mana reserved because it's 25, 25, 50. If we, over here, were to take these nodes to reduce mana reserved, that also solves the issue. But that's entirely optional. It does save you a socket, meaning that you could put this link into your gear if you wanted to. But even like a level 2 Enlighten gets us there. I'll probably personally run Purity of Elements until I've got my resist capped on gear, and then switch to Malevolence and be taking the reduced mana on the tree. Just because at the very beginning of the league and Enlighten, it might be difficult to come by. And then obviously I would have to level it unless I want to spend an arm and a leg to get a pre-leveled one that early, but I don't think that's worth it. Within this POB, which should be in the description, I also have a comparison between Fireball and Divine Ire while leveling. Overall, I think that it's probably not worth using Divine Ire until you have taken Divine Fury and Divine Wrath. Because these two nodes get us a lot of extra conversion. And overall, down here, so we can see that at around Act 4, a Fireball has a Ignite DPS of 18,000, and Divine Ire has an Ignite DPS of 33,000, but that's at 33 stages. And at this point in the campaign, you're not going to have as much cast speed from the Golem buffs like the POB might lead you to believe. So it's more reasonable that if you need to move to like avoid an attack or something, you're going to release at 10 stages, which is 16,000 DPS, meaning that Fireball does a bit more. Also, at lower cast speeds, I feel like Fireball is a more comfortable skill to use. So I would honestly wait to switch to Divine Ire from Fireball at around the time that you're getting ready to kill Act 5 Kitava. You can obviously do it earlier, but that's just what I would recommend. In the notes section, I've got a couple things along those lines. Um, while leveling, I strongly recommend you talk to anybody you might be playing with. You check all the vendors all the time, every time you level up, and that you keep an eye on the trade site to pick up a pair of +1 fire wands while you're using Fireball, or a +1 lightning or +1 physical set of wands when you're using Divine Ire. And those should just absolutely carry you, probably even into white maps, maybe up to yellows, without even having to care about the rest of your gear. And also, it's good to note that golems are probably going to be a pain until you get to Cruel Lab and are able to take Liege of the Primordial so that they automatically resurrect. Because before then, anytime they die, and they are going to die because they're pretty squishy unless you're investing into their defenses, um, you're going to have to resummon them, which is kind of a pain. So I would wait until Cruel Lab when you get Liege of the Primordial to start taking things like Golem Commander. Uh, and then at that point, you can just summon the golems without any downsides because they'll just automatically come back if they happen to die. And the golems, especially while leveling, I feel like are a very, very good defensive layer. If anybody has any suggestions for improvements to this build before the league starts, or has any questions about like how the build is going to function, please comment below and let me know. I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video, maybe share it to some friends if you think they might be interested in this build. Subscribing is, of course, always appreciated. And that's about it for this build. You've got a kind of a really interesting playstyle where you're using the golems only for their buffs and not their damage. Divine Ire is a really cool and visually fun skill to use. Your single target damage is going to be pretty good. Um, Even with this like really, really weak setup of like first couple of days, maybe like the first week for some of the primordial stuff, um, we're dealing just under 2 million damage on a full release Ignite. I wouldn't be surprised if that, mostly with improvements to the weapon and the shield, maybe even dual wielding, I wouldn't be surprised if you could easily hit 4 or 5 million damage by the time that you've gotten to red maps and are starting to do the conquers in that area. Because equipment for this build shouldn't be too expensive. The primary competitors for things like the Anima Stone, Golem, like Carrion Golem builds, got nerfed, and that's not going to be too much of an issue. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching.